Welcome back to our series entitled Building a Great Life. In our last lesson, we looked at building a life of faith, and we need to be able to grow our faith if we're going to build a great life with God. And today I want to talk to you about preparing for a miracle. You know, there are always seasons in our life from time to time that we need a miracle from God. We need God to move in our life in the area of our finances or our job or our relationship or with our kids or even with our parents or in our health. And there are times that we need a miracle from God. And so today I want to talk to you just briefly about how to prepare for God to do a miracle in your life. And I want to look at a story of probably what is Christ's most well-known miracle. It's the feeding of the 5,000. Not only is it probably the most well-known with those inside the church and outside the church, but it's certainly one that God wanted us to pay attention to above and beyond all the others. Because the miracle of the feeding of 5,000 is the only one of Jesus' miracles that is told in all four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. There are other miracles that are told in one Gospel, some are told in two Gospels, some are told in three, but only the feeding of the 5,000 is the miracle that is told in all four Gospels. So there must be some principles in there for us to glean and learn from that God clearly wanted us to focus on, and that's what we're going to do in this lesson. But first of all, let me tell you why God performs miracles to begin with. Jesus performed a number of miracles, but He always did them for specific purposes. First of all, Jesus did them to demonstrate God's power. Miracles come to demonstrate the power of God over our circumstances, over life. Not only that, God performs miracles in our lives to provide for His people. And we see that in this miracle that we're going to look at today. But then finally, sometimes God really performs miracles to stretch our faith. He wants to move in our lives to see that it was only Him. And when we see God move in our lives, it stretches our faith. So let me give you 4 thoughts from the feeding of the 5,000 on preparing for a miracle in your life. Here's thought number 1. You must admit that you have a need. If you remember that story of Jesus feeding the 5,000, Jesus was there and all the people were gathered around. They were teaching. They were out in the countryside. They weren't in a town. They were not in a village. They were not in Jerusalem. They were out in the countryside. There were no stores around, no place to eat. But as He was teaching, it was getting late in the day, and there was no food. And so the disciples came up to Jesus and said, "Teacher, we have a need. The sun is going down. These people have no food. Send them away because we don't have enough to feed them." Now, the truth is they're acknowledging the need. They didn't have the food to provide for the people. They just didn't have it. And so they acknowledged the need. Maybe in your life you need God to perform a miracle in your life. And so start with simply admitting that you have a need. You say, "God, I can't handle this on my own. I've done my best on my own. There's just not enough there. I need you to step in." And that's the first step to seeing God move. But then the second step is also very important. You must review what you already have. Now, after I acknowledge that I can't do it on my own, you tell God, "Man, God, I've done everything I can do. I need you to step in." Then review what you already have. Now remember in the story of the feeding of 5,000, Jesus said, "You give them something to eat." And they said, "Lord, we can't give them enough to eat." And He goes, "Well, tell me what you have." And you remember the disciples, the followers of Jesus, went around among the crowd and they found a boy who had 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And they came up to Jesus and they said, "We have exactly 5 loaves and 2 fish." Now, let's be honest. 5 loaves and 2 fish were not nearly enough to feed the 5,000, but still they had to acknowledge and review what they have. They said, "Lord, this is all we have." And so maybe in your life, as you need a miracle, just review what you have. What has God given you? If you need a miracle in your marriage, go ahead and be honest about what you have. Maybe you have, this is the good part of your marriage, or this is a strong part of your marriage, or you need God to move in your job or in your business or with your kids. Review what you already have. There's always something positive there. And then here's the third aspect. You ready? Give what you have to God. Whatever you have, give it to God and see if He can multiply it. See if He can do the miracle. If you remember, that boy He didn't hold his 5 loaves and 2 fish. It would have been easy for him to do that. It would have been easy for him to say, listen, it doesn't matter to me that the rest of these people don't have food. The reality of it is, I have 5 loaves and 2 fish, and I'm going to keep them for myself. But as long as we hold what we have to ourselves and we don't give it to God, we'll never see Him perform a miracle, because it's only when, and here's the 4th idea, we take what we have and give it to God that He really ultimately multiplies and performs a miracle in our life. So as you think about that story, I just love that idea. And listen to what happened in Mark chapter 4, verse 42. It says, they all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. Did you get that? They gave Jesus 5 loaves, 2 fish. Jesus blessed it and multiplied it, fed over 5,000 people, and there was more left over at the end than they started out with at the beginning. And that may be the way God moves in your life, that after you admit you have a need, you say, God, I've come to the end of myself, just like they did out there. The disciples said, Lord, we don't have enough to feed them. Now, you also remember that the disciples could have kept God from performing the miracle through Jesus had they stayed with their focus on themselves, because that's always a natural tendency for us, to become selfish. Do you remember what the disciples said? They said, Lord, do you expect us to go and spend 8 months' wages buying their food and give it to them? What were the disciples doing? They were focusing on themselves. They were saying, Lord, you want me to take my resources, over a half year's wages, go buy food and give it to them. What was that? That was selfishness. And that's a lot of times what keeps us from seeing God's best in our lives. We focus on ourselves instead of focusing on others. So if you need a miracle today, remain unselfish, acknowledge you have a need, review what you already have, and then give what you have to God and trust Him to multiply it. Because it's only when we take what we have and put it in God's hands do we really see God move. And hopefully that'll help you as you prepare for your miracle. God bless.